representatives, Your Excellency, the Minister of Justice and Public Order, esteemed First Lady, Mrs. Karsera Christodoulidou, distinguished guests. It's a real pleasure to have you all joining us here today. That makes our voice stronger. A plenary hall full with women who leave their marks in politics, in diplomacy, and in the civil society. I can see a man among us. He's a member of the Human Rights Committee. Okay, it feels so good to be hosting this discussion as the chair of the Standing Committee on Human Rights and as vice president of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Organization and Security in Europe. We are joined by representatives of the government, parliamentarians, ambassadors, members of the diplomatic corps, the civil society. Women in peace and security, from theory to practice. Almost a quarter of a century ago, the adoption of United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 marked a turning point. From that point on, women, like the ones sitting in this room today, have turned it into practice. It's all about you. You did it. And none of the piles of resolutions of international organizations on this subject would matter if you hadn't done it yourself. Someone would assume there is widespread consensus on the participation of women in international peace and security. On the ground, the situation is quite slow to progress. The reason is simple. Women's participation in security, above all, is a question of power. And nobody wants to share power, especially when patriarchal stereotypes prevail. Therefore, I am honored to host more than 70 women leading in peace and security, practicing what others preach. As Vice President of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe, I have submitted amendments that have changed the rules of procedure so that the need for gender equal representation in the OSCE PA is taken into consideration when appointing officials of the Assembly. Today, I do not just talk about women in peace and security. It is time to talk and discuss with you all who have a leading role on such important political issues. Dear friends, if I may, dear sisters, the geopolitical sands are shifting. Middle East is on fire. Security is undermined. We are far from seeing the end of it yet. Our entire region is threatened. Insecurity is becoming the norm, and Middle East is not the only unstable region at the moment. The Russian invasion in Ukraine is not making headlines these days, although it continues to pose a threat for global security. European Union member states might have acted upon principles sanctioning Russia, but at the same time, because of that, they are suffering severe economic consequences as a result. Furthermore, the situation in Armenia and Azerbaijan throws South Caucasus into instability, and I see nothing but stagnation in the Cyprus problem. And in this geopolitical vortex, the massacre of 7th October, the Hamas brutal terrorist attacks against Israeli civilians have destabilized the entire Mediterranean region. The Eastern Mediterranean remains a region where major actors have compelling strategic, security, and economic interests. At the moment, the Mediterranean Sea is seeing unprecedented military concentration. Turkey is seeking another role, and I'm referring to the latest statements of President Erdogan to present himself as the protector of the Muslim world, justifying crimes that have shaken the world. His efforts aim to maintain his revisionist aspirations and he seeks to exercise his influence apart from the Mediterranean in the Arabian Peninsula, in South Caucasus, in Central Asia, and beyond. Against this perfect storm, the role of women is of utmost importance. Women in peace and security begets the question, what about women in war? What about women in insecurity and instability? How can they contribute? How do they approach such important issues? What gives them a distinct approach? I very much look forward and count on your inputs, both in this discussion and most importantly in your fields of expertise. I am positive that our keynote speakers will have a lot to say about these issues, and I look forward to hear their perspective. Thank you.
Please allow me to speak in Greek for a bit. I would like to inform you that there is interpretation from Greek into English and vice versa. I would like to inform you that our meeting is broadcast live on the YouTube channel of the House of Representatives and also on the House website. So I have said we have interpretation into English and into Greek. So I would like to ask any of you who would like to intervene to fill out the relevant form in your folder, and in about 10 minutes a member of our staff will pass by to collect the forms. I have spoken in English. I continued in Greek, and now please allow me to go back to English because I would like to lift any obstacles to our communication, at least for the majority of our guests who are foreign speakers. Our aim is to find ways to communicate efficiently, honestly, and in a targeted manner.
Now allow me to invite to the podium Her Excellency, the President of the House of Representatives, Mrs. Annita Demetriou, the first female President of the House of Representatives. Madam President, you have the floor for 4 minutes. Thank you.
Dear First Lady of the Republic of Cyprus, Mrs. Filippa Karsera Christodoulidou, dear Minister of Justice and Public of the Cyprus Republic, Koukkides-Prokopiou, President of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Organization of Security and Cooperation, Ambassador of France, Mrs. Elena Rafti, members of the Parliament, ambassadors, ministers, ex-ministers, commissioners, representatives of the religious groups, former Commissioner, welcome, esteemed guests, dear friends. Let me begin by expressing my great pleasure and satisfaction at the sign of a plenary session of a Plenary Hall full of women leaders in politics, diplomacy, and activism. I wish to warmly welcome you all at the House of Representatives and to congratulate you, the chairperson especially, of the House Standing Committee on Human Rights and Equal Opportunities for Men and Women and Vice President of OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, Mrs. Irini Charalambidis, for this excellent initiative to organize this event. And Irini, thank you so much for everything you are doing to support all of us in the end of the day. The truth is that there is progress, albeit slow in terms of more women being engaged in security and peace-related matters and processes. This is a very positive development that we must feel proud of, while realizing at the same time that progress is not just meant to happen, but is the result of decades of hard, often frustrating work. The question remains, are we doing enough? Today's discussion can bring visibility for women that lead in politics, in diplomacy, and in civil society. And visibility is much needed to encourage more women and girls to engage. Let us not forget that we are having the forthcoming European elections in a couple of months. Because you can't be what you cannot see. Dear guests, currently there are numerous regional conflicts. How do we respond? What is the impact on women and what is the impact of women? The impact on women is devastating. Conflicts amplify gender inequality, poverty, and the victimization of women. What we are witnessing is devastating in Ukraine, correctly mentioned from the President Irini Charalambidis in Nagorno-Karabakh, and of course more recently in our neighborhood. What we see in Israel and Gaza is terrifying. Terrorism cannot be justified, full stop. Atrocities against children and women cannot be tolerated under any circumstances. Standing resolutely against terrorism and doing everything possible to alleviate the humanitarian costs cannot be mutually exclusive. Even more needs to be done to protect civilian lives, and Cyprus is doing its fair share in this regard. Cyprus is fully aware of the consequences of armed conflicts for women and girls. Sexual violence was used as a weapon of war during the Turkish invasion back in 1974. Cypriot women were raped, tortured, humiliated, and many of them brutally murdered. And while we know that for every woman who reports these horrific crimes, there are many more who remain silent. I'm somehow sometimes relieved that these women were found the courage to report their rapes and are now supported after intense efforts of the House of Representatives led by women committee chairs in close cooperation, of course, with a woman minister. Cypriot women shoulder a great burden in the aftermath of the Turkish invasion, as is everywhere the case in efforts to restore the social fabric and destroyed economy of the country. And yet Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot women's organizations have had a significant contribution to the efforts for reapproachment between the two communities, for reunification and peace in Cyprus. The effective participation of women in peace processes as provided for in Resolution 1325 in terms of their participation in mediation activities and decision-making is essential. Women's insight and perspective are essential, and their analyses are indispensable to understand the dynamics of conflicts and to develop effective prevention and intervention strategies. This is why the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 is a priority. The Republic of Cyprus has set up a national action plan to reflect that and to build on that. This resolution is not only about breaking some glass ceiling. The world needs styling, it's what women can bring to the table. Pragmatism, progress, and this is what we need for the moment. Dear guests, the House of Representatives believes in and stands ready for initiatives and synergies, which will further increase women's visibility in peace and security, and will enhance the legislative work and the oversight process in this respect. I wish you fruitful deliberations in today's meeting and congratulate once more Mrs. Charalambidis for this initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Now I will give the floor to the First Lady, Mrs. Filippa Karsera Christodoulidou. It is well known, of course, that Mrs. Karsera Christodoulidou is a career diplomat. Please, you have the floor, Mrs. Christodoulidou. Thank you.
Distinguished President of the House of Representatives, distinguished Chair of the Committee, Honorable Minister of Justice and Public Order, Your Excellency, ambassadors, distinguished guests, I have received with great interest and great pleasure the invitation of the chair of the Standing Committee to take part in this discussion on women, peace and security. Firstly, I would like to thank and congratulate Mrs. Irini Charalambidou for the initiative, stressing that, in my opinion, the discussion of this issue with the participation of remarkable and competent women, especially at the House of Representatives, shows political maturity that is late, perhaps, but is powerful in conjunction with the program, with the governance program of my husband, Mr. Christodoulidis.
Esteemed guests, Undoubtedly, the world is facing deeply challenging times. Global threats such as armed conflict, climate change, hunger, and poverty all jeopardize international peace and security. Stability and security are at great risk, with significant effects to all groups of the population, particularly women, elderly, and children. In fact, current developments in the Middle East, Cyprus' immediate neighborhood, are a shocking reminder of how rapidly humanitarian conditions can change and how vulnerable women remain. While I was preparing this intervention, I realized that almost 80 years have passed since the end of the Second World War and the genesis of three major landmarks in the evolvement of international human rights, namely the UN Charter, the Universal Declaration for Human Rights, and of course, the European Convention of Human Rights. While great women have played a crucial role and made significant contribution in all fields of policymaking in the world during all these decades, we are still, and we have to admit it, far away from equal representation when we refer to participation of women in politics, in decision-making bodies, in all spheres and fields, including international relations, peace and security. With UN Security Council Resolution 1325, in response to which the government is already implementing a national action plan coordinated by our Gender Commissioner, the UN is recognizing the role of women in prevention of conflicts, resolving and maintaining and rebuilding peace, stressing the pressing need that women should and must participate in peacekeeping operations. I'm here today to congratulate and support this initiative because I truly believe in what the previous head of the United Nations Entity for Gender Equality and the Empowerment of Women, Under Secretary General Michelle Bachelet, stated, that wherever there is a conflict, women must be part of the solution. And as a diplomat, a mother of girls, and as a spouse of the President, I will support and stand with conviction behind any policy that aims to effectively promote equal rights, equal access, and equal opportunities. You can count on me, Madam President. Given that I am amongst such distinguished audience today, I want to take this opportunity to raise three main points. First, my deep belief that women have a major role to play in international relations, as well as political processes, in conflict resolution and peace building, in securing peace, security, and prosperity. I know it, I believe it, because I have seen it in practice. Women make up more than half of the population. More university graduates are women. They are educated, smart, capable, experienced, and they bring to the table a unique set of characteristics. They are practical, results-oriented, committed, effective, sensitive but sensible, with empathy and great sense of what is just, reasonable, and fair. Their multiple roles as daughters, mothers, partners, make them more focused on what is important, what is of true substance, and I believe more persistent in terms of problem solving. Women also have a moral compass, an instinct that guides them. When they know there is the correct path, that this is the right thing to do for the public interest, nothing will stop in trying. Secondly, women, wherever they are, whether in public or private business, they have a remarkable work ethic and they are great team players, knowing how to lead, but also how to give space to younger generations. Then why are the numbers so low when it comes to representation in high-level position in the international or national political official positions? And this takes me to my third point. I served as career diplomat for 24 years, a male-dominated field, at least when I joined the ministry. Following 3 postings abroad and many demanding postings internally at the ministry or the presidential palace, as mother and spouse, what I can say is that we absolutely need more support so that women are enabled to lead. I agree, of course, that we must put in place effective mechanisms to ensure women's participation and representation in politics and political processes, preserving full and meaningful women involvement and leadership. However, these steps on their own will not solve the problem. Because women like me, and I guess like you, ladies, very often have to say no and reject positions in which we could thrive and serve our country meaningfully for very simple reasons. Because at the age of 40 to 50, when they have enough experience and still enough courage and energy to undertake difficult positions, they cannot ignore and leave behind their important roles and obligations derived by their roles as mothers, as daughters, as partners. Added to that, when women are at the outset of their career, normally at the ages between 25 and 35, they have to stay behind to raise their babies or exhaust themselves to be able to handle. Simply put, if we ever want to secure fair and equal participation of women in politics or in any other field, which will be tremendously valuable for the public interest, we must strive to create the conditions so that women, young and older, can advance in their careers in whatever they wish without being forced to abandon their role as mothers, daughters, and spouses, even temporarily. By the way, these roles are equally important for the society we want to have if we want to have a society based on the principles that mothers can pass to their children. So how we do this? Just like the other countries have already done it. And in this, the Parliament has an equal role to play together with the government. More nurseries and baby care centres, better schools and public transportation, good elderly care centres, safe playgrounds, and green towns, equal pay, more annual leave for mothers, flexible working methods, scholarships to young girls who are coming from low-income families. Only when we achieve all this will we see more women at the highest levels of public and private sectors and more happy women in politics, culture, in any field they wish. Last point. I'm encouraged and motivated by my husband's track record. As a foreign minister, he encouraged all capable women in the ministry with deeds, not just words, to pursue their dreams and accept high-level demanding positions. He appointed during his tenure more women directors in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or ambassadors abroad, sending the message that what matters is quality of work and nothing else, showing at the same time understanding when family affairs occurred. In his new capacity as president, he has appointed as ministers, deputy ministers, commissioners, directors at the presidential palace, more women than ever, and also women who are at a particular demanding phase of their life, women young enough to have young children who were to take on this difficult task. More than 41% of these officials are today women. This is important for yet another reason. These women are seen by younger ladies as positive role models. They inspire others to believe that if they can make it work, well, yes, they can do it as well. These steps, Madam Chairperson, dear guests, create optimism and that more capable women in more demanding high-level postings can thrive if they are enabled and given the opportunity to. We must not just create the culture of acceptance and reject the stereotypes about the women behind the men. No, we must above all create the conditions for women to compete male colleagues in equal terms. And then we will see also more women in politics and in peacekeeping and security as well. And I can humbly say that I have no doubt that this government has the political will and the courage to create these opportunities, these conditions for all women to pursue their real dreams. In achieving this common vision, the Parliament has, of course, a pivotal role to play. Σας ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ και εύχομαι μια παραγωγική και επιτυχία.
Thank you very much. I wish you a fruitful discussion.
The message follows a 2-minute video by the President of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. The OSCE PA is the largest regional security organization under Chapter 8 of the United Nations Charter. It focuses on security and peace. Gender equality is a basic premise. Therefore, we have another woman leading this institution, Mrs. Pia Kauma.
Dear Irene, fellow parliamentarians, thank you for inviting me to address this special meeting of the Standing Committee on Human Rights and Equal Opportunities for Men and Women. I'm sorry for not being able to join you in sunny Nicosia today. But I hope that my experience as a Finnish parliamentarian and as President of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly can contribute to your discussions. As a Finn, I'm proud of my country's efforts to promote female engagement in politics and decision-making. The Finnish Parliament has long been one of the most progressive in the world. Today, 46% of our members are women. Our long-standing commitment to gender equality is illustrated by our successive national plans on women, peace and security, which are developed in close cooperation with civil society. In the OSCE as well, we share the strong conviction that the meaningful participation of women can help prevent and solve conflicts. I have no doubt that this will remain high on the OSCE's agenda when Finland takes over the chair in 2025. Within the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, we continue to promote the role of women. For many years, and despite the fact that women remain underrepresented, steps have been taken to ensure equal representation in positions of leadership. Today, thanks to a proposal by Vice President Irene Charalambidis, our rules now clearly say that gender balance must be taken into account in the various appointments made by the President. Sometimes we need to entrench these values to guarantee true progress towards greater gender equality in all spheres of life. We can do this in our parliaments by championing policies and laws which contribute to the women, peace and security agenda. But it also means that even though we should congratulate one another about what we have achieved in the past 2 decades, we must remain vigilant. We must continue to protect women, and we must continue paying attention to new threats to women's rights. And we must continue to build resilient partnerships to promote the role of women. I'm sure that your discussion today will identify areas where we can all work together towards these goals. Thank you.
I would like now to introduce our first keynote speaker, the esteemed Minister of Justice and Public Order, Mrs. Anna Koukkides-Prokopiou. Mrs. Prokopiou is also an international relations expert, so she has a very keen interest on security issues. Mrs. Prokopiou, you have the floor for 10 minutes. Thank you.
Kalimera.
Good morning.
Representatives, Madam Chair, esteemed First Lady, esteemed guests. When Irini asked me to take the floor today, and she said, try not to speak just as the Minister of Justice, I was a bit perplexed. Because it's, once you represent an institution, it's quite difficult not to represent the institution. But then I couldn't escape from myself. So what you will hear today as my 2 cents of wisdom has to do as well with my previous position as an expert on women, peace and security agenda. So I will start by dedicating this session to some of my former colleagues who are now dead, because they have been working in the field. And I'm still part of the WhatsApp group of the UN Senior Women Talent Pipeline. And on the 1st of March, I said, ladies, I need to leave the group. And they said, no, you stay. You're one of us. And I get some very unfortunate news from that group. So I will start by dedicating this session to them, because being part of the Women, Peace and Security agenda on the field is dangerous. It's not easy. Then the second thing I would like to stress before I start is that I believe we need to dedicate this session as well to the women of Cyprus who have suffered quite a lot. When I first read the Fawcett report by the Council of Europe, by the legal expert James Fawcett, what I read, it's something that I cannot forget, because it describes very vividly the atrocities that women in Cyprus suffered in 1974. And I think we have this burden and this responsibility when we talk about the Women, Peace and Security agenda to remember that some of those women who suffered, who were raped, who were brutally attacked, are still alive, and they're still among us. And there is a responsibility to remember. And to remember not only just to vindicate them, but also to make sure the same things do not happen again to the younger generation. So I will start by saying the following. When we talk about women, peace, and security, the men will always correlate the women with the peace ingredient. And when we start talking about security, they will assume that their being male makes them more of an expert on security than makes us, that we're actually the experts. And it has happened to me many times that we're in a room full of men and they make this assumption. I've worked on security for the last, very, very specifically for the last 7 years, but any man, I'm telling you, they assume they know more about me than me on security because I'm a woman. Now, when we define security, there's some definition that I would like to bring to the table, and that's the notion of inclusive security. What is inclusive security? Inclusive security means that we take into consideration the security concerns of everyone in the room. Now, if there are no women in the room, their security considerations are not taken into perspective. Now, in the negotiations regarding the Cyprus problem, which is very close to home, many times I've quoted dear Minister Kozakou Markoulis when she said, I felt very lonely in that negotiation room because there were not many women around. And the question is not having the women around to take notes and do the donkey work, or some of them negotiate, as in the case of Minister Kozakou Markoulis, but the question is, are there any women making decisions? So I'm putting the question forward, and I'm glad that we've already adopted the National Action Plan concerning 1325, which commits the Cyprus government to making more women participate, to allowing more women participate in the Cyprus peace process, which is something that we have promised to the United Nations Secretary General as a pledge. And I'm glad that I see some of the women who participate in this process, or did participate in this process, in this room with us today. So, what do women bring to the table? They bring their different security perceptions, different than the perceptions of men, different needs. In my capacity as an expert in my previous life, when I mapped out the perceptions of women regarding security, they were about very basic human needs. Will my kids be safe at school if there is a peace process concluded into a solution? Will I be able to walk safely back home at night without being attacked? Will there be racism prevalent post-solution in Cyprus? What about healthcare? What about social security? When we asked them the same questions, they said, oh, armies, guarantees. Women were concerned about those too, but they were also concerned about the basic survival needs of them and their kids, which is another important premise they bring to the table. We know that when we have more women involved in the peace process, the peace agreement lasts longer because it's more inclusive, it's more sustainable. And women have this tendency in managing risk differently than men. This is proven by scientific studies. We also know that women score higher on the emotional intelligence indicators, proven by many, many surveys. So we know that women are better negotiators than men, especially when they negotiate on behalf of others and not for their own personal gain. Proven. So do we need more women around the negotiating table? The answer is yes. Do we need more women in the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly? And I've worked with OSCE in the past in a project on Turkmenistan. So the OSCE organization is an organization close to my heart. So do we need them? Yes, because we know by fact that when women are involved in the parliamentary process, they build consensus, they go across party lines, they are very much concerned about human rights violations, and they are very much concerned about the women issues that the men usually forget about. So, is it easy for women to be part of the Women, Peace and Security agenda? No, it is not. And I will just start by saying the following. There is conditionality attached to our very existence. We are always someone's something. We are the daughters and the mothers and the associates of others in many, many cases. And I will say the following. The Cyprus Constitution, unfortunately, is a contributor to the patriarchal structure that we are faced with. Because our existence as women in the Greek Cypriot community is exactly conditioned by the ethnic origin of the husband or the father in our constitution. So if I marry a Turkish Cypriot man, I become a member of the Turkish Cypriot community. So the conditionality is there. Maybe we don't think about it, but it structures the way that we are perceived and the way that we are allowed, because we're always allowed to enter the room. The room belongs to the men, and sometimes we're allowed to enter too. And I'm telling you from personal experience now that you're always judged by someone else's standards. And I know that time is running out, and there are other very esteemed speakers which will be taking the floor after me, and I know it's good to have questions posed. But I will leave you with something that a friend of mine who was very close to Hillary Clinton, she was part of her team, a funny story that she shared with me. So I was sitting there with Shelley and we were exchanging stories, and she was telling me, you know, Hillary once went to this girls' graduation ceremony. And she was asked, what's the best advice that you can give me? One of the girls asked, and she said, you know, always make sure you get your hair done. Because she said, I was criticized because I had my hair up in a scrunchie. I don't know if you remember that story. She got out of the plane to go negotiate about something quite important, and the press was talking about her hair. She hadn't done her hair, and she had it put up. So why was she sharing that story? I was discussing this with my friend, and she said, obviously, she was making the point. You're judged differently. Always judged differently. So I don't want to end on that quite pessimistic note. What I want to end this intervention with is on a positive note, and the First Lady is here. I know I'm sure she adheres to what I will say because she's already mentioned it in her speech. President Christodoulidou has made a pledge to involve and encourage and engage women actively in the political process, and it is already happening. And we have a very active and First Lady who's had an exemplary career herself. So I'm sure that this pledge will also extend into the Cyprus peace process. Hopefully it will begin. We hope it begins, because there can be, we've been focusing on war and conflict too much. But I think it's time, from what we see going on around us in the region, to also focus on the peace and on getting things settled, rather than leaving them unsettled. Because frozen conflicts, as we've seen, they often erupt, and when they erupt violently. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Prokopiou, for a very insightful address and for mentioning the atrocities women of Cyprus suffered. And I do agree with you that we have an absolute different perspective from men on security issues. We move now to our next keynote speaker, Her Excellency, the Ambassador of France in Cyprus, Mrs. Salina Grenet-Catalano. France, as a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, is playing a key role in the region and the world in general. Mrs. Grenet-Catalano has held various positions, including in the United Nations and other international organizations, and has served in various diplomatic posts, including in the Middle East. You have the floor for 10 minutes. Thank you.
Madam Speaker, dear Annita, Madam First Lady, dear Filippa, Mrs. President of the Parliamentary Assembly of the OSCE, Mrs. Vice President of the Parliamentary Assembly of the OSCE, dear Irene, Minister of Justice and Public Order, dear Anna, Ministers, Members of Parliament, fellow ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, and Commissioner also, because I want to mention the very good work that your Commissioner is doing. Kalimera. I'm very pleased and very honored to participate and contribute to this debate dealing with very important issues this morning. The multiplication of current crises reminds us once again that we live in a more and more unstable world. Conflicts find their origins in different sources which can add up to each other. Socio-economic inequalities, tensions around natural resources, fights for territories, global warming are the crucible of suffering which women and girls are very often the primary victims. In conflict zones, but also in pacified regions, their place in society confronts them with difficulties and discriminations in all areas. And it is a reality that was further exacerbated by the pandemic. The issues that we are discussing today are more than ever topical. In the context of the horrendous conflict which is raging on our doorstep in the Middle East, I would also like to take this opportunity to send all my thoughts to the civilians affected by the Israel-Gaza crisis, and especially the women and children. As you know, the UN has been working for several decades now on the Women, Peace and Security agenda, and the Resolution 1325, adopted in 2000, and 9 other resolutions adopted since then, have been implemented by all countries at a national level. In France, we are implementing our 3rd National Action Plan, which covers the period 2021-2025, and our plan is based on 3 pillars. First, prevention, by raising awareness. Second, protection of women and girls in conflict and post-conflict situations. And 3, women's participation in peace processes. So our national plan was published on the occasion of the Equality Generation Forum, the most important global feminist gathering 25 years after the Beijing conference in 1995. I will come back to that conference later on. But France reiterates its support to the ongoing efforts of the United Nations to mainstream the women, peace and security agenda at all levels, and especially in peace processes. We will continue to push for strong mandates and adequate resources for the concrete implementation of this agenda. For instance, we are mobilizing resources to implement our national plan and achieve our ambitions, and we have, as an example, contributed for 6.2 million euros between 2020 and 2022 to the Global Survivors Fund, launched in 2019 by Dr. Denis Mukwege and Nadia Murad, Nobel Peace Prize laureates in 2018, for their efforts to end the use of sexual violence as a weapon of war and armed conflict. I would like to say a few words about Nadia Murad, because I had the chance to meet her several times in Paris. She's a very courageous woman, and she suffered persecution due to her religion, Yazidism, in 2014 during the Second Iraqi War. She was rescued, and she is now a Yazidi human rights activist and the UN Goodwill Ambassador for the dignity of victims of human trafficking. She was received several times by President Macron and by our successive ministers of foreign affairs. And Catherine Colonna, for instance, our current Minister of Foreign Affairs, has consulted her recently on the best way to address the needs of victims of sexual violences committed during Russia's war in Ukraine. More broadly, since his very first mandate back in 2017, President Macron has made gender equality and the realization of women's human rights a priority. This has led France to join a small group of countries which have adopted what we call a feminist diplomacy in 2019. What does it mean, a feminist diplomacy? It means a diplomacy which makes the defense and the promotion of the rights of women and girls one of the priorities of its action, and which integrates this priority into all areas of foreign policy. Women's rights are not optional values. They are universal human rights protected by international human rights law, and it's self-evident that the challenges that lie ahead of us, they won't be properly addressed without the full, equal, meaningful, and effective participation of women and girls in all respects. So our action is concrete. I will give you a few examples. We co-chaired with Mexico the conference, the forum that I mentioned previously, the Generation Equality Forum in 2021. And during this conference, $40 billion US have been announced at the forum to enhance gender equality through a 5-year action plan. This forum epitomized what multilateralism in action can achieve. And France has fully honored its commitment, increasing its financial support for sexual and reproductive health and rights. And we have we have dedicated 400 million euros over the period 21-25 in this regard. And we'll continue to tirelessly defend the right of women to their bodily autonomy, as well as the recognition of the right to abortion as a fundamental right. By the way, I would like to tell you that following an initiative by President Macron, we are going to try to reform our constitution, to include the right to abortion into our constitution. So we'll be, if it's done in the coming months, we'll probably be the first country to do that. Secondly, we have launched a support fund for feminist organizations of the Global South, which mobilized 120 million euros over 3 years. The idea is to fund the activities of feminist movements all around the world, and especially in low-income countries. This fund for feminist organizations has supported up to now 1,000 associations in over 70 countries. And we strongly and systematically condemn the repression of demonstrations by very courageous women in Iran who are fighting for their freedoms, especially during the Women Life Freedom movement following the death of Mahsa Amini, a 20-year-old Iranian student who died 3 days after being arrested by the Iranian police for, I quote, wearing inappropriate clothing. So in October 22, about a month after her death, the city of Paris awarded her with the honorary citizenship. She was also posthumously awarded in December 2022 with the Franco-German Prize for Human Rights and the Rule of Law from the German and French Ministers of Foreign Affairs. And in 2023, she received the Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought by the European Parliament. Those won't make her alive again, but it's a symbol and it's a demonstration of our moral support to Iranian women. Everything must be done to protect women and girls from sexual and gender-based violence and discrimination. This is why we call more and more countries to ratify the Istanbul Convention, and this is also why France and the Netherlands present every 2 years a resolution on efforts to prevent and eliminate all forms of violence against women at the UNGA. But to be able to implement an international, I'm very late, so I will really do quick. We need to set an example ourselves, and I would just like to give you a few figures about what we have tried to do within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We have put in place measures to give female agents greater access to positions of responsibility with personalized support and to encourage them to apply for senior positions. Now, in the Quai d'Orsay, our Ministerial Executive Committee is for the first year and for the first time in history as a female majority for the first time. We have the number of female ambassadors has doubled in less than 10 years. So now we have reached almost 30% of ambassadors are female. We are aware that we still have a long way to go, but we are trying step by step to aim for professional equality. We humbly wish to encourage more countries to officially join the club of countries with a feminist diplomacy. In a word, feminist diplomacy strengthens diplomacy in general. And we strongly believe that our world will be more balanced, more harmonious, and more effective when there is real progress towards equal rights between men and women. And as the French Minister of Foreign Affairs, Catherine Colonna, said last September in New York, we should all acquire the reflex of equality, which benefits everyone, and not only women. This is all the more important as we see that in many places the rights of women and girls are suffering a very worrying setback. And to resist this, women's participation in decision-making processes must be strengthened. This is why we encourage the appointment of a UN envoy with this objective. 28 years after the Beijing conference, it's high time. I wish the women in Cyprus full success and full participation. I've met a lot of great women in this country, and I hope that they will be able to say their words also in the politics and in the life of their country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador, for an excellent speech and for highlighting France's efforts in the context of United Nations to push for a strong agenda, and also for asking for sufficient resources, because policies cannot be implemented without sufficient resources. Thank you. I would like now to give the floor to Ambassador Elena Rafti. Elena Rafti is a career diplomat with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Cyprus. From 2018 to 2022, Mrs. Rafti was the permanent representative of Cyprus to the OSCE in Vienna, and that period I had the chance to work closely with her. At the moment, Mrs. Rafti is the diplomatic advisor to the Minister of Defense. Ambassador Rafti, the floor is yours for 10 minutes. Thank you.
Your Excellency, President of the House of Representatives of the Republic of Cyprus, esteemed First Lady, esteemed Minister of Justice and Public Order, esteemed Chairperson of the House of Parliament Standing Committee on Human Rights and Equal Opportunities, as well as Vice President of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, distinguished guests, dear friends. Let me, at the outset, thank Mrs. Haralambidis for this initiative at this moment where we do see a severely turbulent international environment surrounded by many conflicts. The title here of the speech, also taking the cue from a recent debate in the UN, is Women, Peace and Security from Theory to Practice. Historically, women have been excluded or severely underrepresented from formal peace processes, from structures of power, underrepresented in political processes. This applies to most places in the world, and Cyprus, of course, is not excluded from this. In 2000, Landmark Resolution 1325 was adopted on women, peace and security after the advocacy of a strong and diverse, geographically diverse group of member states, as well as civil society organizations, wanted this resolution adopted. The resolution asks states, as the classical subjects of international law, to increase women's participation and to aim for full, equal, and meaningful participation in peacemaking, in conflict prevention, and in peace building. It is structured around the pillars of conflict prevention, participation in peace building, protection of women and girls during conflict, and also looks at women's specific needs in post-conflict resolutions. It also aims to increase especially the participation of women in decision-making and in institutional and resolution mechanisms at the international, regional, and local levels. So the question to ask is, 23 years later, where are we really with the World Women, Peace and Security agenda? There has been a plethora of commitments, of initiatives, of pledges, so certainly we see a shift in the normative framework. But there is also a gap between this normative framework, the commitments and the pledges, and the actual numbers of women included in formal peace arrangements or in the gender provisions that are there in peace arrangements. So it could be a fair assessment to say that the Women, Peace and Security agenda still remains largely descriptive and not yet substantive. It affirms a goal behind which we can all rally. We can accept that there is no sustainable peace and security without women. Women are, after all, a majority of the world's populations. So what can we do to move there? What are the considerations that we can see? What are the problems, the opportunities, the challenges to move ahead with this agenda? I think also it is fair to say that we need to look at some of the assumptions, because some might be uncomfortable thinking that there are binary assumptions here, portraying women as natural peacemakers and women as naturally aggressive or prone to conflict, which of course is a reductive assumption and embedded in assumptions that are problematic and might perpetuate certain assumptions about women and men and about their roles. I think it's fair to say that there isn't sort of a shared womanhood concept that would make us see women, peace and security through the same lens. Our geographic, our ethnic backgrounds, our social and economic opportunities, our implications with power structures, they do condition our perspectives. They do color and filter the way we perceive conflict and peacemaking. So I think it is important to recognize this so as not to perpetuate stereotypes of women's inherently pacifistic nature, to portray women only as victims, and not to see also that women have a tremendous capacity and they are agents of change. And I think there is a lot that is being recognized now, to see women as agents of transformative change. At the same time, when I want to stress this, to move away from this binary perception, we should also understand that, yes, women have and are impacted by conflict disproportionately, often when it comes also to sexual violence, but also to recognize the impact on men, because men are also victims of this. And I think we have to move along and ahead also by taking into account the perspectives of men, by bringing men also on board of this agenda to really be able to effect sustainable and long-lasting change. If you allow me just to mention a few words on the OSCE, which has been at the forefront of mainstreaming the Women, Peace and Security agenda, of taking a gendered perspective. The OSCE has a strong female leadership in the Secretariat, in missions, in the Parliamentary Assembly, and gender mainstreaming is very important for the OSCE, a declared priority. And this is also included in field missions and field operations, where missions are encouraged and asked to mainstream it in their actions, but also to report, to come back and report on what is done in this field. OSCE member states have devised national action plans also for the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security agenda. Cyprus also has a national action plan. And the effort through these action plans is also to see how the reform in security sector institutions can connect and can align to wider goals, how they can align to a wider agenda. And that could be the agenda of the SDGs, where we have Goal 5 that speaks of gender equality, but also Goal 16 on peace, security, and strong institutions. And we do not have strong democratic institutions if we do not have women's full and meaningful participation in all levels. So the OSCE is making this effort to systematically align and to systematically embed this agenda in all its efforts. Now, when we're talking about the national action plans that we have all adopted, I think it's also fair to point to some of the deficits there. And one is that often there is very low or even non-existing funding for implementing the mechanism of the action plans, or that the language which concerns women representation is vague or not concrete. It doesn't set concrete targets for representations. And I mean, speaking personally here, I think one of the ways really to increase representation when we do face severe underrepresentation is to move ahead with quotas. So we need clear language, we need clear mechanisms, we need funding to be able to move on to effect change. Now, how can we here, and I see so many women and men in this room committed to this, how can we help to effect this change in the Women, Peace and Security agenda? How can networks of women in politics, in defense and security, in mediation, in diplomacy, how can we take on advocacy roles to ensure that there is ownership and buy-in at all levels of government? How to interlink and harmonize with wider agendas of sustainable development, of peace and security? I think we can do this through networks, through advocacy, through mentorship. We also need to start, I think, with a clear assessment of the barriers to women's meaningful participation in political processes. And also this becomes even more difficult, I would say, in the security and defense sector. What are the factors that would allow and enable women's meaningful participation, and what are the barriers? So conducting a barrier assessment is one, and there is, the UN is taking the lead in this and asking member states and asking the defense sector also to conduct such a barrier assessment. It's not necessarily an easy task. It's not necessarily something that is easy to do, but even just to have this assessment, even to have this dialogue institutionally, to have this conversation there, to create awareness, this is going to help the institution. It's going to help not only women, it's going to help men. It's good for the whole of society. So again, I think there's a clear need for us to recognize that barriers affect both men and women, affect society, and we should conduct this assessment in all our institutions that we represent, we could commit with our own pledges that we can quantify, that we can set to help others. I think even in countries where women are severely underrepresented, like in Cyprus, we have broken the glass ceilings, and there are many representatives here that show this. It's important to shift also the glass wall. It's important to create a critical mass of women to be able to shift and have a wider debate, because otherwise it will not be enough to really have sustainable change. I mean, in defense, and the Minister of Justice and Public Order alluded to this, that sometimes it's easier to look at security rather than defense, to look at human security. I agree with that. I think it could be an opportunity. The shift to resilience in strategic matters in defense also presents an opportunity for the women, peace and security agenda, because we need also to look at human security. I would also like to have a word of caution or a sobering thought on the many conflicts we face. And we have often seen that when there are conflicts, women's participation can be pushed back. I mean, they could be included in peace processes and then later on marginalized. We could see shifts in ideology, because women's role in nation building is well known to all of us. So, and the reinforcement of patriarchal structures. So this is something that's for all of us to be keen, to be vigilant, to see how we can help with that. So I would just, I wanted to also bring some of the problems here, or some of the challenges. Definitely, we can all work and do more. We have to look at the data also when it comes to participation in different structures, and disaggregated data. Gender data is also something that we need to work on. And again, to come back to the OSCE, that has quite a strong female leadership also in terms of women ambassadors. There were a lot of networks. Women ambassadors decided to often come together, and again, you know, as agents of our states, of our governments, we had and do have different views, but we could come together in networks to try and advocate for certain things, to advocate the inclusion of certain things on the agenda. And I think perhaps we can also learn from this and see what kind of networks we can also institute here that would push for concrete, quantifiable change, so that we can move on with the women, peace and security agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you for highlighting, Mrs. Rafti, the role of women as agents of change, and for underlining the role of the OSCE in pushing for gender agenda mainstreaming. Thank you so much. And now, it's time to open the floor for the debate.